I just wanted a good night's sleep and to drive to work. But when I opened the door, the entire neighborhood was flooded with a blinding shade of pink. And the culprit? None other than Ho Karen. Have you ever seen 20 cars in your neighborhood painted pink? If you've ever encountered an Ho Karen or someone obsessed with excessive control, share your story in the comments. That morning started like any other. I woke up, pulled back the curtains, and took a deep breath. The morning air was fresh, and the sunlight bathed the neighborhood in a warm golden hue. Everything looked peaceful, or at least, that's what I thought. Just as I filled my lungs with air, a strange, pungent smell hit my nose, strong, sharp, like someone had just sprayed fresh paint nearby. I froze, frowning. Normally, this neighborhood was always pristine, everything in perfect order, perhaps too perfect, thanks to Karen's obsessive control over every little detail. But today, something was off. I shrugged, trying to ignore the unpleasant smell, and went to the kitchen to make a cup of coffee. But the moment I took my first sip, I realized the paint smell hadn't gone away. In fact, it was even stronger as I stood near the front door. I squinted out the window, my sense of unease growing. What the hell is going on out there? I set my coffee down, opened the front door, and stepped outside. A light breeze blew past, carrying the overpowering scent of paint. I looked down at the sidewalk. There were faint streaks of paint on the pavement, as if someone had been working here overnight. I scanned the street. The neighborhood was eerily quiet. Normally, at this hour, people would be outside, getting ready for work or gossiping about the latest Ho nonsense. But today, where was everyone? Then I saw Mr. Mark, my next-door neighbor, standing frozen on his lawn. He wasn't moving, just holding his coffee cup, not drinking it. He was staring at the street, his face frozen in horror. I frowned. "What's wrong, Mr. Mark?" I called out. He didn't answer right away. He just slowly turned his head toward me, his eyes filled with sympathy. "Son, brace yourself," he sighed, sounding like a man who had just lost all hope in life. Before I could ask, a blinding reflection hit my eyes. A color, familiar, yet completely unwanted. I turned to look at the street, and in that moment, I froze. Every single car in the neighborhood, every last one of them, had been painted a bright, Barbie pink. Not a single car had escaped Karen's whole purge. I whipped my head around to look at my own car, my beautiful, sleek, black sedan, strong and bold, now reduced to a ridiculous neon pink nightmare, like a child's toy. I blinked, then blinked again. No, this had to be a dream. A weird, twisted nightmare. But no, the smell of paint was still thick in the air, and my beloved car was still there, drenched in this Barbie horror. And then, from behind me, a triumphant laugh echoed. I didn't need to turn around to know exactly who it was. I'm not the type to start fights or look for trouble. I just wanted to live peacefully, drive my car to work, and avoid all the ridiculous Ho drama. But when you live in a neighborhood where Karen is the Ho president, that seems impossible. I love cars. To me, they're not just a way to get from point A to point B, they're a source of pride. My sleek black sedan, polished, well-maintained, was my pride and joy every time I got behind the wheel. And now, in a single night, it had been turned into a Barbie pink disaster. It all started when Karen, the queen of obsessive uniformity, decided that every car in the neighborhood should be the same color to maintain aesthetic harmony. She didn't ask for opinions, didn't wait for approval. And of course, I was one of the many victims of her lunatic plan. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She wasn't content with controlling the Ho, she wanted to transform everything into her perfect Ho utopia. Everything had to match: the house doors, the fences, and now, the cars. I could imagine her sitting in her home meeting room, glaring at the neighborhood map, frowning. That red car looks out of place. That black SUV? Absolute chaos. It's time for everyone to comply with the rules. And so, in a fit of dictator-level impulse, she decided to paint every single car pink. No consent, no warning. Just some mystery painters appearing in the dead of night, turning the entire street into Karen's Barbie dreamhouse fantasy. But I wasn't the only victim. The entire neighborhood woke up to the same horrifying sight. I saw Mr. Mark, my elderly neighbor, standing frozen on his lawn. His coffee cup slipped from his fingers, splashing onto the ground. I had never seen a 70-year-old man look so utterly shattered. Down the street, Lisa and Jake, a young couple who had just bought a badass off-road Jeep, stood there, eyes wide in shock. Their powerful, rugged black Jeep now looked like a cheap plastic toy from a dollar store. I can't believe it. My car, Lisa shrieked, her voice cracking. And then, the rage started spreading. One by one, neighbors stepped out of their houses, jaws dropping, brows furrowing, eyes widening. And then, everyone turned toward one place. Oh, Karen's house. Because there was only one lunatic in this neighborhood who could possibly be behind this. And just as I opened my mouth to curse, that triumphant laugh echoed again. I didn't need to turn around to know exactly who it was. I stood there, completely frozen, staring at the ridiculous Barbie pink car in front of me. My sleek, black sedan, my pride, now looked like a cheap toy from a discount store. Around me, panicked voices started rising. No, my car. Oh my God, WO did this? This can't be legal under HOA rules. The whole neighborhood erupted in chaos. My neighbors stood in their yards, eyes wide in disbelief. Everyone was looking at their cars. All of them had been uniformly synchronized into the same blinding pink. At the end of the street, Jake and Lisa looked like they were about to cry over their off-road Jeep, now reduced to a Barbie off-road vehicle. Next to me, Mr. Mark trembled as he looked at his old truck, as if his best friend had betrayed him. And then, as if this nightmare wasn't horrifying enough, a triumphant laugh echoed again. I snapped my head around. Standing right in front of the HOA house, with an arrogant stance, was none other than HOA Karen. Arms crossed, smug as ever, she looked like she had just accomplished something truly magnificent. And in true Karen fashion, she was even wearing a blinding pink dress to match her masterpiece. All cars in the neighborhood must have a uniform color for consistency, she declared, voice filled with authority. And I chose pink because it represents luxury and harmony. For a few seconds, stunned silence filled the air. Then, the neighborhood erupted. You can't do this, I yelled, fists clenched. This is our private property. Who do you think you are, deciding what color our cars should be? Lisa's face was red with fury. What rule allows you to do this? Someone else roared. Karen just smiled. And that's when I knew. This was war. But Karen just shrugged, flashing a smug smile. I sent an email to everyone about the new HOA rule. If you didn't read it, that's your fault. I blinked. HOA email? When? The neighbors exchanged glances. Clearly, no one remembered receiving any such email. You're lying. Jake pointed an accusing finger at her. If there was a new rule, we would have had to vote. The HOA can't just make unilateral decisions like this. Karen chuckled, shaking her head, as if pitying us for our lack of understanding. You people don't get it. This is an improvement. I'm just making the neighborhood better. You should be thanking me. I immediately turned to Mr. Mark. Does your security camera have any footage? I asked, urgency in my voice. He nodded, his face tense. I already checked. You won't believe it. They did this in the middle of the night. I clenched my fists. Just as I suspected. Karen had hired a secret team of painters, sneaking around at night to spray paint every single car. They had covered their faces, moved from house to house, renovating cars while the whole neighborhood slept, completely unaware. By the time we woke up, the forced masterpiece was already complete. I took a deep breath, trying to contain my rising anger. You think you can just do this, and no one's going to do anything about it? I stared straight at Karen. She raised an eyebrow, then burst into laughter. And who's going to stop me? You people? She truly believed no one would do anything. She truly thought she had the power to get away with this. But she had forgotten one crucial thing. The police won't see it that way. My voice was cold. For the first time that morning, Karen's smile faltered. The neighbors erupted into murmurs. Several pulled out their phones, calling the cops right away. And just like that, Karen's triumphant expression started to fade. She had gone too far. She thought this was her victory. But this was only the beginning of her downfall. I wasn't going to let this slide. After a brief moment of shock over my Barbie pink car, I went into action. I made phone calls, knocked on doors, and soon enough, an angry mob had gathered outside Karen's house. "Who has security cameras?" I called out, scanning the crowd. Mr. Mark raised his hand immediately. "I do. I checked the footage this morning. You won't believe this." We huddled around his phone screen, and instantly, I felt my blood boil. On the video, in the dead of night, a group of men in white protective suits, faces covered, moved stealthily from car to car, spraying them pink. They worked quickly, moving with precision. This wasn't some random act. And then, a familiar figure appeared on the screen. Karen. She stood in the middle of the street, arms crossed, commanding them like a general leading a battle. She grinned as she watched the cars being painted, nodding in approval. She really did it. "This is insane," Lisa gasped, her face flushed with rage. "Who the hell does she think she is?" Jake's fists clenched, his eyes burning. "We have to sue her. This is property damage," someone shouted from the crowd. The anger exploded. Phones were pulled out, calls were made to the police, to lawyers, to HOA officials. As for me, I turned to face Karen. She was still standing there, smirking. "What's with all the fuss?" she asked in a mock innocent voice, throwing her hands up dramatically. "I was just helping everyone improve their curb appeal." The crowd roared. "Improve? You spray painted our cars without asking. Are you insane?" I snapped. Karen laughed, shaking her head like I was a foolish child. "Ink is the symbol of our HOA," she declared proudly. "You should feel honored to be synchronized like this." I laughed too, but not because it was funny. "You just confessed in front of the entire neighborhood that you did this." I smirked. Karen froze for a split second, but quickly regained her composure. "So what? This is a community improvement. I'm just helping you people. You should be grateful instead of whining." The crowd erupted. "Grateful? You think we should be grateful that you turned our cars into a Barbie nightmare?" Lisa shrieked, barely holding back her fury. "My car is worth $50,000. How much are you paying me for this, Karen?" A furious man shouted, pointing straight at her. "Fine. If you think this is just an improvement, then go explain that to the police," I said, my voice ice cold. And right on cue, the sound of police sirens filled the air. 2 police cars turned into the neighborhood, stopping right in front of Karen's house. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions stern. Karen suddenly went pale. "Who called the police?" one of the officers asked. "I did." Mr. Mark raised his hand, still trembling from the shock. "She vandalized the entire neighborhood's cars." The officers glanced around, their eyes sweeping over dozens of Barbie pink cars parked along the street. "It looks like we have a serious problem here," one of them muttered, turning to Karen. "Ma'am, can you explain what happened?" Karen cleared her throat, adjusted her blouse, and tried to stay calm. I was just helping improve the neighborhood. This isn't vandalism, it's an upgrade," she said, her voice slightly higher than normal. The officer frowned and turned to me. "Do you have any evidence?" I smirked and held up my phone. "Everything's on security footage. She hired people to do this in the middle of the night. The officer reviewed the video and exchanged glances with his partner. "Well, that makes this simple," he said, turning back to Karen. "Mrs. Karen, you are being accused of vandalizing private property belonging to dozens of residents. Do you have anything to say?" Karen turned ghostly white. I did nothing wrong. This is Ho. I have the right," she shrieked. But no one cared about her excuses anymore. Karen had believed she could control the entire neighborhood as she pleased. She thought no one would stand up to her, that everyone would accept her ridiculous rules just like before. But this time, she had gone too far. As the police officers wrote up their report, lawsuits started pouring into the courts. Nearly 20 residents filed complaints, accusing Karen of intentional property damage. Insurance companies refused to cover the damages, stating that the Ho was financially responsible for the incident. An emergency Ho meeting was scheduled, and for the first time in neighborhood history, a petition was signed by nearly every resident, demanding Karen's removal as Ho president. Karen felt the heat. She was no longer the Ho queen. I'll never forget the stunned look on her face when the judge delivered the verdict. "Mrs. Karen, after reviewing the evidence, this court finds you responsible for compensating all residents for vehicle damages. The estimated total cost is," Karen swallowed hard, $47,500. The entire courtroom fell silent. Karen's eyes widened, her lips trembling. "What? I can't pay that. I was just trying to make the neighborhood look better," she screeched. The judge didn't even blink. "Vandalism is not community improvement, ma'am. If you cannot pay, your Ho will be held financially responsible." Karen stood there, paralyzed, while the HOA's lawyer buried his face in his hands, sighing in defeat. But Karen still didn't realize that this wasn't even the worst part. The following Ho meeting was the most crowded in history. The hall was packed, with every single resident there to witness her downfall. It took less than 5 minutes for the vote. 100% agreement. Ho Karen was officially removed from her position. She stood there, mouth hanging open, as if she couldn't believe it. "You can't do this to me. I am Ho," she screamed, but no one cared anymore. That night, the entire neighborhood threw a freedom party right in front of Karen's house. Ink balloons were hung up, but not to celebrate her. They were mocking her. Some residents even printed posters that read, "Oh Karen the Dictator 2018 to 2024. Rest in peace." Lisa and Jake decorated their black Jeep with a massive banner. "Freedom from Ho Karen." Karen didn't dare step outside. The next morning, I picked up my car from the repair shop. The sleek black paint was restored perfectly. No trace of the Barbie nightmare remained. I started the engine and slowly drove past Karen's house. She stood at her doorstep, arms crossed, her face twisted in frustration. I didn't say a word. I simply honked my horn, a loud, piercing blast that echoed through the neighborhood. Karen flinched, eyes widening as she glared at me. I just shrugged and flashed her a challenging smile. "Good morning, Ho Karen." Karen stiffened, her lips pressing into a thin line. I could see her hands trembling with rage. She had lost everything, her money, her power, her reputation. And I made sure she would never dare touch my car again. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw her standing frozen on her porch, her face red with anger. Just days ago, she had been the Ho president, controlling everything, making demands and rules as she pleased. Now, she had nothing. This story wasn't just about a car getting painted pink. It was about ownership. About how no one has the right to dictate what you do with your own property. And most importantly, about standing up for yourself. Karen thought she could control everything until the entire neighborhood fought back. And that's the biggest lesson here. Never let the Ho, or anyone, think they can control you. What would you do if someone painted your car without permission? Have you ever encountered an Ho Karen in real life? If you have, Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Crazy Neighbor Drama for more insane host stories.